Welcome to the desert of the real. Sorry, I just always wanted to say that. Oh, I've been waiting for this all year. This might surprise some of you, but it took me until this year to watch The Matrix and its sequels. And after doing so, I can come to you all with a statement no one has ever said before. The Matrix is really good. And it's really good for all the reasons everyone says it is and more. It's like if you took all the gonzo, self-aware action of a John Woo movie, gave it the depth, aesthetic, and world building of a William Gibson novel, and then for shits and giggles throw in some estrogen tablets, Das Kapital, a bunch of philosophy textbooks, and some of the most innovative filmmaking yet to grace the screen. It's awesome, plain and simple. A film you can digest as a popcorn film, as a cinematic pleasure, and as a philosophical treat. But my watch also led me to this less popular statement. The Matrix sequels are also really good. Sure, maybe not quite as good as the first one, which had the benefit of being more condensed and punchy, but it literally has everything that made the first one great, with just a few minor pacing issues, and a few scripting choices I wasn't a fan of. Honestly, I really don't see much to poo-poo on. I really don't get how if you're a fan of the first movie, you wouldn't enjoy these films. Try watching them blind, and I assure you, they're great. Obviously, I can't go into too much detail here. This isn't a review of the earlier films, after all. But if you want that, please check out friends of the channel, Sophie from Mars, and Let's Talk About Stuff's amazing video on the sequels, a video which I was lucky enough to contribute my voice. But really, all of this prelude is to say the minute I saw that first trailer, I knew I needed to see this movie. It was one of those films where, even with the risk of disappointment, I was just happy to finally get to see one of these films in the theater. Hell, even if it was bad, I was satisfied in just seeing a trans director advertised as a feature of a blockbuster movie, and even just seeing Lana Wachowski credited as Lana Wachowski on a Matrix film was enough for me to say I was glad that this was made, no matter what I ended up thinking of it when I finally saw it. Regardless, in no more than 2 days of binge watching, and with one trailer, I was a Matrix superfan, and nothing could prevent me from seeing this opening night. So I did, and I don't know what I expected from this film, but it wasn't what I got. The minute the movie finished, my immediate reaction was, well, a lot of people are absolutely going to hate that. But fuck them, because I loved it. This film is hard to classify in a lot of ways, mostly because it doesn't live up to a lot of pre-established perspectives we have on film. I mean, on a pure grandiose scale, this really does live up to being a sequel in terms of bombast. There are some spectacular set pieces here, including a huge battle towards the end with environmental destruction, extras in the hundreds, explosions galore, and a bike chase against a helicopter. While I will admit the hand-to-hand combat is not as up to snuff as the older films in terms of pure spectacle, I have to also give credit to the wider array of chaos surrounding things. It genuinely feels like we're seeing a world collapse in on itself to prevent its own destruction. And that is a success in its own right. Honestly, I was shocked by some of the filmmaking chops here in general. You can absolutely see some skills learned by Lana since the trilogy. Not that the trilogy isn't beautiful, but this shows a growth in subtlety. We always knew how great Lana and Lily were at big moments and emphasizing emotional explosions. But there's a montage towards the beginning exploring Neo's life in the Matrix, and it's quite stunning how brilliantly it is cut together and shot to portray a pure monotony without overdoing it. That takes poise and maturity, and I think it's something that came with Lana's experience since the trilogy ended. I love the performances here as well. I mean, Keanu has always fit Neo incredibly well, and here is no different. And Trinity still fits Carrie-Anne Moss like a glove. Genuinely, if Neo was a perfect role for Keanu, Carrie-Anne Moss is Trinity. That's how much she always captured the role. And this is no exception. The minute she walks on screen, you feel that very energy of the character, and that's amazing. But really, what I'm impressed with are the new additions. While it's easy to miss Lawrence Fishburne, and they are certainly big shoes to fill, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II really brings his own energy to the role, and while it's hard to live up to the original, it's still a pleasant addition to the series. Jessica Henwick is amazing as Bugs, just a great character to add to the series that I want to see so much more of. And Jonathan Groff and Neil Patrick Harris fucking killed this. Groff I was unsure of at first, but as time has gone on, I realized he brought a new energy to what was very clearly a new version of a classic role that frankly I can't imagine the Matrix universe without. And Neil Patrick Harris, wow, we've been really underestimating him, to be honest. I feel like we've all recognized him as a great talent, as a charismatic funny guy who can sing and seems to host the Tonys every other year, but when was the last time we let him have a role in a drama? Gone Girl? I think for once we got to see Neil flex a muscle of dramatic flair and intimidation he rarely gets to, and God was it a treat to see him on screen. But let's get to brass tacks here. We know what you want me to talk about. The writing. It's been the biggest bugbear for so many people, and I'm here to say something very simple. This is not the Matrix sequel I would have written. And I don't think that matters. I think often in film criticism, we approach films with the idea of what we would have done, what we think is the best choice for the moment. And sometimes that can be really useful to analyzing why we don't click with films. But frankly, this is a film that buffs that completely, because it's exactly why I wouldn't have made this that makes it so good to me. It's the film Lana needed to make. The Matrix Resurrections is not a film narrative in the typical way we think of. See, in most revitalizations of old series, repeating an old film in the series' tropes verbatim would feel trite and lazy. And there is an element of that here that I do think is a slight weakness, but this film isn't meant to be read in the same way that other reboots are. This film is about repeating cycles and looking back from the past and realizing that you can relive the past and accept it. It's a story about Lana looking back at her biggest endeavor after transition, how she relates to seeing others try to own it and make it their own, and her attempt to reclaim it for herself, to return to it with what she's learned, but not to reject the past either. And in that, this all feels cathartic. It feels like a positive therapy session on screen, every moment having an emotional weight outside of the direct narrative. Yes, we've seen Neo save the world before, but we haven't seen him do it with this extra lens added. He's not just waking people up, he's becoming whole again. That's why he chases after Trinity. Trinity is a part of him. It's meta for a reason. It's about the relationship to the Matrix films. It's not a fandom work or a satire. It's not fully positive or negative. It's its own true analysis from its creator. It's a brand of film rarely seen, and I find that special. So yes, I have problems with it. The kung fu fight scenes we've come to expect are weaker in terms of choreography. There's a bunch of narratives that are just sort of introduced and then are never fully explored, which is very disappointing. As stated, at times I wish they did stray a tiny bit more from the first film's setup, even if I get why they stuck as hard as they did. And switching to a more self-aware quip style of comedy rather than the more goofy, over-the-top humor of the original is a downgrade to be sure. I mean, come on.
I still know kung fu.
They fly now!
I understood that reference.
Listen, I enjoyed the first Avengers, but Joss Whedon will be tried at The Hague for what he's done to cinema. But frankly, analyzing this film in a traditional way misses the point. The film succeeds for a simple reason. This is the film Lana needed to make. Not just wanted to make, needed to. That's hard to quantify. And this is proof that you just can't look at film criticism as a formula, because in the end, it's all artistic interpretation. So I get if this didn't work for you. It's certainly not what we've come to expect when it comes to blockbuster films, and I totally agree it's basically a burn it all down experimental franchise movie if there ever was one. But god damn it, if this didn't feel special to me. It stands the least on its own out of any of these films. It's certainly not the most perfect or my favorite film of the year, but I'm glad it exists, and god damn it, I had a great time with it. Not in a typical sense one might expect, but in a way that was nonetheless real. And in the end, that's why we watch movies, don't we? Lana Wachowski's The Matrix Resurrections gets an 8 out of 10.